we are going to fail,
Right.
on our journey. That's why we have this iterative cycle in design. So let's start failing, and I don't know if this is a good analogy. I'm terrible at analogies, but we'll go with it anyway. I think it's like sometimes fishing on Lake Geneva or Genève, how it was pronounced. You go out with your little boats, you go out with your fishing rod, and you're looking to catch that fish. Like Lake Geneva is a massive place, right? I mean, it's going to take me ages. I don't even know if they've got fish in Lake Geneva, but anyway, and you're kind of going round.
I wasn't fishing there.
You can fish there, but you're going around Lake Geneva looking to catch a fish. Now, what some founders do is they rock up in a yacht, and go to one spot, and then put all their eggs in one basket. Maybe that's a better analogy, and try and catch that fish. And then, of course, they can't make their way around Lake Geneva. So some of the most admirable founders are the ones that don't prioritize anything apart from the important things, and just are super lean, like every pound matters, obsess over everything.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Business Strategists. In this episode, as a guest, I actually have a dear friend of mine, Charlie, who has seen both sides of the startup world. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charles. I'm a product designer, facilitator, innovation consultant. And for the past 5 years, I've been building other people's startups, specifically MVPs. I've done 166 of them through a methodology that I created. And I also have my own startup, one of them that obviously makes those MVPs with, but yeah, that's what I've been up
to. Do you follow your babies around? So you mentioned 166. Do you from time to time check into whether they have survived, if they're thriving, or if they're just like crash and burn?
There's a horrible statistic, which is unavoidable, which is 9 out of 10 startups fail. I'd like to think I can reduce those odds, but no, I mean, there's so many different variables. Yeah, of course, it's when you're designing something, you really want to see that to be used, but it's a tricky place to be for founders. Ideas, sometimes people move too fast with ideas. Right. Sometimes people try and put too many features in. Let's face it, none of us know what we're doing. There's no entrepreneurial startup book.
Amen.
I mean, there are some books around, lean methodology or design sprint methodology from Jake Knapp, sprint book. But we're all just trying to find our way. And I think the runway that people have sometimes just runs out, and so yeah, I do try and follow most of them. Some have been bought out by bigger companies. Some have turned into P&L companies, and yeah, just try and keep connected to the majority of them for sure.
So in our warm-up, we quickly touched upon the healthcare industry. So imagine if you were a doctor and so, somebody comes to you and this is like following up on the whole, 9 out of 10 fail. So I have recently gotten into this because I mentor startup founders for like mindset and all that. So when they come to me and they're like, yeah, nothing is working, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Because there is 90% chance that you're going to fail. And as long as you accept that from the get-go, it's going to be so much easier for you to fail and then bounce back. But as a doctor, I feel like if somebody comes to you and they're like, well, shit, they've got a really big tumor here, you would flip that and be like, well, you've got a 10% chance of survival. Let's work towards that.
Well, I think
it's better when it comes to startups.
There's a word that's, I don't know who said this now, perhaps Don Norman. He worked at Apple as a principal researcher, and he didn't come up with the term UX, but he certainly was the first possibly to use it in this context. But I think he said fail fast and fail cheap. We are going to fail,
Right.
on our journey. That's why we have this iterative cycle in design. So let's start failing, and I don't know if this is a good analogy. I'm terrible at analogies, but we'll go with it anyway. I think it's like sometimes fishing on Lake Geneva or Geneva, how it was pronounced. You go out with your little boat, you go out with your fishing rod, and you're looking to catch that fish. Like Lake Geneva is a massive place, right? I mean, it's going to take me ages. I don't even know if they've got fish in Lake Geneva, but anyway, and you're kind of going round.
I wasn't fishing there.
You can fish there, but you're going around Lake Geneva looking to catch a fish. Now, what some founders do is they rock up in a yacht, and go to one spot, and then put all their eggs in one basket. Maybe that's a better analogy, and try and catch that fish. And then, of course, they can't make their way around Lake Geneva. So some of the most admirable founders are the ones that don't prioritize anything apart from the important things, and just are super lean, like every pound matters, obsess over everything.
How do you think they can do the fishing better? I like that analogy, by the way. I don't know why you said analogy.
How can you become better fishermen? There is, you listen to your users. We are visionaries, I think, but it's not the vision that matters, it's the execution. And you can't always do it by yourself. You do need to bounce off people, because the initial idea sometimes translates into lots of different, another idea. But, so you kind of start with this idea, you've got the vision about the problem you're going to solve. And then you kind of pull at the thread a little bit, and you start to adapt your idea. But you adapt your idea based off user feedback, because you're not building it at that point for you. You're building it for an audience. And you could have Susan, in Benbow Close in Wales, or it could be Tommy, the Côte d'Azur or Monaco, and it's a really wide user base. At this point, you're not building it for you. You're building it for Tommy, Susan, Olia, Jesse. And so we really have to listen to what their needs and wants are. Now, that doesn't have to be in expensive user research exercises. You just have to empathize. And I always get this wrong, but it's like perception versus perspective. We see a lot from how we perceive the world, perhaps, but we need to look at it from their perception and put ourselves in their shoes, but really do it. Really think about whether this is going to be useful. Really think about that. So when you have, and we hear about this all the time with something called user-centric products, human-centered products, but that's something that gets lost because we make it about, it's always about us. Everybody's world is about them,
Right.
But when you're starting a startup, it's not about you. It's about the audience who will use it and the problems that they will solve.
So, since I really liked the fishing analogy, I just want to carry on with it. I think what you first said, like the first sentence, like you got to bounce it off people. I think a lot of people, especially who don't have experience building startups, would understand it as in go talk to another fisherman, like ask another fisherman how to, fish in this lake. But then later on, you basically said, talk to the fish. So should you talk to the fish first before you talk about the fisherman?
Yeah, 100%. But you've got to watch out for conflict of interest in that, right? Sometimes we will talk to a designer, right? Or a user research. There's always a play there with those people. You want to have this kind of non-conflict of interest. I don't know what the word is, but just somebody that just has no skin in the game,
right.
From it. So a true consultant, that is worth everything. And also, you've got to let ideas breathe a little bit, right? Sometimes we're too fast to go fishing. There we go. Just let it breathe, have your idea, sit with it, take emotion out of it, use evidence, use statistics. Do I know this to be true is something that I think Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, sort of talks about quite a lot. Do I know this to be true? And he says about when we're thinking about things that we don't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's the same here. Like, do I know this to be true? Do I know this is going to work? And sometimes just prove it to yourself. What's the data? What's it sort of say? And then go and speak to a consultant and see what he says. And the $250 or €250 for the hour, they'll spin you off in a whole different direction, and then go speak to somebody else and get a second opinion. And that's more valuable than just getting stuck into it, I think, sometimes. So yeah, speak to the fish, speak to other fishermen about the good spots.
I think in my experience, when I usually try to get to the bottom of who is it that they're building the product for, it's such a painful question for them, because they can tell you everything about the product, but they would have very surface level of understanding of the audience. And so when okay, you see, I'm now obsessed with this analogy. I'm okay, do you even know if you're trying to catch a tuna or a clownfish or, I don't know, a fucking shark, right? So, and they usually struggle with answering that question. Why do you think that is?
Why don't they know their audience?
Yeah.
Why do they struggle to understand their audience?
I'm just building this tool that's supposed to do X, Y, and Z. No. And I'm okay, who is this for? Well, for entrepreneurs. I'm that's really vague.
So I don't think people don't know what they don't know. It's a common thing, and unfortunately, sometimes you have to get burnt. You have to try and find your own path, because you don't know what you don't know, and I'm going to do it this way, and then you reach the dead end and you get burnt, and then you come back and maybe I should have done that in the first place, So I'd say it's not because they don't want to do it; it's because they don't understand the value of listening to their users, I think. And the only way to do that is to really sort of to go through the trenches, deploy stuff that doesn't convert. We talk about landing pages. Put too many features in there. The biggest thing I use is jargon, complicated jargon, or I see very complicated products, too many features, with language that only the person can understand, or platforms that need like a NASA control panel, that need that only NASA can control, and so yeah, I'd just say they don't know what they don't know, for sure. I think also when we're building products, you really want to, I was going to say this before I forget it, it's like your nana's microwave. You ever go to your grandma's house and she's got a microwave, and it's like I just want to heat my beans up, and you're trying to how do I heat the beans up here, right? And you're trying to press every button and it doesn't work. Right. And then some microwaves, you just go to and go, poop. Then it starts to heat your beans for 30 seconds. This is how products should be built, in the first place. So that's a good understanding of human-centered. But yeah, you only know how to sort of do that by listening to the users, and people don't know what they don't know. So, which is another reason you should speak to other fishermen.
To continue the analogies, and again, I don't know why I say you're not good at them. You're really good at them. So I've got one more. I think I've been really preaching this whole talk to the users thing recently. And what I usually say is that imagine you're an actor who needs to fit into a certain role. So what I know happens is that, especially experienced actors, they would literally start to live in that character. They would adopt everything from the character. And I'm you gotta be a user. You gotta be so deep in their heads that you don't even have to think twice about what you're building, because you've become the user. Mm-hmm. How important do you think that is, and how can a founder or a product builder or whoever can achieve that?
I think you've got to, if we're doing qualitative and quantitative studies, you've got to take a range of data. I'd probably say that to not people that say, I am my user, not that that's what you were saying, is always a bit of a red flag when I'm talking, initially, because you can't be, because there's probably 10,000 of them. So we can't be the one individual. Otherwise, we're now building for Susan, instead, right? But what we can do is still put ourselves in their shoes. I think that's what you're sort of saying, and how they may perceive it. I think that's great for looking at landing page copy and how people understand the product. But then you do have to use qualitative and quantitative data as a whole, and just try and use that to your advantage, for sure. So don't get too engrossed in it, I think. But definitely try. It's a tough one, right? So it's almost like a contradictory statement in a way, right? But yeah, you have to be, but then you need to pull yourself back out of it and then look at all the data to inform those decisions. Data-driven design decisions.
I like that, because I think what you said about the founders, like they don't know what they don't know, I think very much applies to the users. They just don't know what they want, or they don't know what they don't know.
But you know what? Rightly so. They don't care. Rightly so. They are busy. Rightly so. What's in it for me? Because that's how we think. We are selfish to ourselves, and rightly so. So you've got to be. That's a really good empathy, for your user, to make sure that you're sort of hitting those notes. It's not always the same. If you're in healthcare, to be quite honest, the research points towards people do care, about what they're reading, and they've got to read long form text. They're not just bouncing around. We're not on TikTok buying the moon projection for the wall when we're doing buying healthcare supplements, for example. We're a bit more invested about what we do to our bodies. But the majority of us aren't, building healthcare supplements, and we just really need to sort of build products for that attention span, perhaps.
Right. I've been always fascinated by the example of Apple and its founder, when he was basically saying, oh, I don't care what people want. I'll tell them what they want. I mean, I'm probably twisting the narrative a little bit, but that's like it's not like he knew that people wanted an iPhone, right? Or an iPad or anything like that. He was basically saying, oh, here's this new shiny thing and you absolutely need to have it. Do you think in the current market that still applies? Or do you think that was like a thing 10, 15 years ago and it's like very hard to do something like this today?
Ooh, do you know what? I'm going to cringe. Apparently you can't say cringe now. Apparently that's an outdated
word. Why not?
Which I don't know. Apparently millennials, or Gen Z, think that's an outdated word. And I was like, God, what's that happening? But have I reached that stage in my life? So we can go back before Steve Jobs, and we can talk about the very famous quote from Henry Ford, the car maker. If I asked people what they wanted, they'd say faster horses. And it's a really famous quote, from Henry Ford when he went off and obviously built the car, And yeah, I mean, I think it was. Okay, this is going a bit off piste here, but I think Steve Jobs also said that, you're in a life, right? You kind of, this life and these rules have been created by people that aren't smarter than you. That, we get up, go to work, we have our favorite slippers, I don't know, we watch TV. That's a life, but that's not the life you have to lead. You can lead a different life. This life and the routine has just been created by a previous generation. So yeah, do things differently. And one of Apple's campaigns was challenge the status quo. Be different, or something like that. Think differently, I think it was the Apple Mac campaign.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, in some respects, don't listen too much to the fish. Don't get caught up too much into it, because then you're not innovate. And And I think that's really what it's speaking to is innovation, right? And I think, products can always be improved. I was speaking to a chap yesterday. He's an American chap, and he said that Shopify checkout page is the most perfect checkout page or purchase path in the world. You cannot get any better from a design perspective than that checkout page. Well,
okay.
I mean, I tend to say at this point in time today it is, but I'm open to the challenge on how might we improve the checkout or purchase path, to be something different. And of course, if you design or innovate inside those boundaries, then there's not much else to go. Well, innovation is about thinking differently and thinking outside the box, and let's put on some Vision Pros and let's check out, so differently that way, or I don't know, whatever.
Okay. I have one for you. How do you distinguish between your innovation potentially being too early or your innovation just not being a product market fit?
Oh, do you know what? I wish I could remember the passage. So Robert Greene has a book called The 48 Laws of Power. And there is a law in there, and I cannot remember it, but it speaks to this. You can't change people too much, too soon. He really talks about going into management, of a company, for example, as a CEO, and saying, we're not going to do it like this anymore. Now we're going to do it like this. And it's so radical that you just get this kind of fallout of people.
Right.
And, but change needs to happen slowly sometimes. So, sort of bringing it back to Apple Vision, we talked about a second ago. Well, Google Glass was out 10 years ago. Augmented reality was out 20 years ago. I think it's longer than that, right? But no one knew what to do with it at that point. It's too radical, but they kind of moved to the ears. Let's control the ears first, and then they're slowly bringing people up. And even Apple Vision's a bit kind of out there, but hold on, it's been out for, it has some competitors beforehand, to try and get people aware to it. So I think I've changed my mind on that a little bit recently. I'm all up for radical change, but again, listen to the fish. We've got to be able to think about them, and do they want to change as quickly as we make it happen? So I think you can have the vision for where you need to go, the release plan, and then we slowly sort of bring those incremental improvements. Do you know what, Ollie? I've got the best one was this. I went to Viva Tech last year. 50,000 startups. This Viva Tech, right? It was really good. And, I was walking around it, and there were some incredible startups. And I went past this lady, and she did do you know what? She looked great. The store looked great. The product, it looked like a good idea, but it was too far. The product was automatic toothbrushing. So you put like a gum shield in your mouth, and it brushes automatic. And I thought, I just don't think I'm ready for that in my life right now. I'll stick with the toothbrush, thank you. But there's a really good example of, I'm sure that's going to clean your teeth better. I'm sure it's more comfortable. I'm sure it's better, but it's a bit too much right now. So perhaps innovating on the toothbrush a little bit to try and lead towards that. And maybe even Uber, right? Uber was another good example. Driverless cars. That was, I think, don't quote me on this, I think that was always their game plan. It was never to have drivers. It was always to have driverless cars, but we can take incremental steps towards that.
Right. No, I think this is true. This was their end game, and they had to start somewhere. So now that we've touched upon Steve Jobs, I, from time to time, ask this question on the podcast. Like, do you identify with any of the, I call them entrepreneurial archetypes? And I've got 3 of them. Actually, Steve is not part them. So one is the Oprah, which is like, oh, you're just like, you come from this like very challenging background. You just want to pull yourself from there and then help other people do the same thing. Then we've got the Elons, which is basically like, oh, I'm just going to like change the freaking world. And then you've got the Jeffs, who's like, you know what? I'm just going to make shit ton of cash. No matter what, I'm just going to make shit ton of cash. Do you associate with any of them, or maybe do you have somebody else in mind?
I mean, Steve Jobs is an inspiration. Of course, just being a designer, a product designer, and the way he sort of created the term UX, which is my industry, the way he built these user-centric products. But to the three personas that you kind of mentioned there, definitely not an Elon. As much as I want to be an Elon, because I think he's doing some very, very cool stuff. And the fact that he manages his own diary, right? So he doesn't have, right? And I'm like, how do you do that? Like, what do how do you get through your days? That's incredible. And I think the way he thinks is incredible, but it's not me, I'm definitely an Oprah. I get and again, I don't want to be cringy here, but I get incredible enjoyment about passing my knowledge over to other startup founders. Sometimes I'm talking to a startup founder and realize that it's not going to be a good fit, and I'll continue talking for like an hour and a half. Still, I'll know in the first 5 minutes, to be honest, sometimes. And then I switch the conversation to be, how can we help this person? Because I don't want to see them get burned. And the problem is sometimes it's just such an overwhelming amount of information that you're trying to pass. It's almost impossible to do it all, I think also this is really, I saw a chap in Opio, as a farmer in Opio, and he was maybe about 89. He'd been picking some vegetables, and he sort of got on his tractor, and then he pulled over in Opio, which is in the south of France, and he put the mushrooms and I can't remember what was there, carrots and whatever else on the table. And he was just sat there, and I was like, I sort of went past in the car, and I thought, as a business, this happens all the time. As a business owner, he's trying to make it happen. I know what he's doing. He hasn't got a sign there. I really wanted to go make the sign and make the sign better for him. And I went back and bought a lot of vegetables off him. Didn't use any of them, but it just my heart was just like, I just need to try and, support him in some kind of way, right? Super cringe, real story, but then let's go the polar opposite now, right? And say that I'm definitely a Jeff. And we'll probably get to that. I know that can be contradictory in some kind of ways. I don't think they are competing in any kind of way.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. I think you can have like a little bit of both, or follow them really. It's just like probably one part is like a little bit more dominating than the others.
To be an entrepreneur, maybe we'll touch on this in a bit. I mean, money is the language of business.
Mm-hmm.
There's, it can be a byproduct, but where you do what you love. I think that actually, for me, that came after this. Now I do what I love, and the money's a byproduct. But it's fundamentally the main thing you require, the main ingredient you require to keep innovating and to keep fishing. So you have to be a Jeff at some point, not for personal gain, but for your company's gain is what you need to be, a Jeff, and hopefully an Oprah at the same time.
I think there is this like stigma around wanting to make more money. And I've heard, and I say that word with the quote unquote, that sentence from the founders without them even saying that. They'll be like, yeah, but I just kind of want to do this and do that. And I'm like, okay, how much money do you want to be making? And a lot of people would struggle with answering that question. for whatever reason, it usually, comes back to some, I guess, inherited belief from our parents or some other like immediate circle. They'll be like, yeah, I don't know, just to live comfortably. I'm like, okay, so what is it for you living comfortably? How much money do you want to be making? And they'll be like, and I'm like, okay, go to a drawing board or whatever you're using and just map it out. Find your number. And everything is going to be so much easier from there. Why? Because then you would know how much money, A, you want to make, and B, how much money you have in your bank account right now that you can burn safely. And this will tell you whether or not you should be taking that leap of faith for your startup. Like, because if you don't even know what's going on in your bank account, and you'll be surprised how many people don't even want to like have this understanding, to be like, yeah, but should I, should not? I'm like, look at the money. Like, literally, it's all about the money. Like, can you afford burning 6 months worth of your whatever income or something like that to try to make this thing work? Because if you can't, you probably shouldn't. Because if you burn that money and then you find yourself and your 2 kids or whatever is going on in your life sitting without any money, then you're probably going to be very depressed, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, and then you're never going to try again. So it's like, for me, I mean, it took me years to come to this conclusion, but I'm like, it's all about the money, and that's okay. Like, it's okay.
Absolutely. Having targets. So I think what you're talking to there is when you're starting a startup, right? What do you require? I think there's a statistic. Like the happiness. There's no more happiness after €55,000 a year or something. It doesn't. You don't get any happier. I think there's a certain like critical mass that you have to get to, and then it doesn't really make a difference. Just going down the cringy thing, you really have to be. It's not about the money. You need the money to survive. You need the money to pay your staff. You have a responsibility there to look after the people that you make promises to. I think which is what drives me with the money. You have a responsibility to the promise that your brand gives to your to the users and the audience to keep innovating and keep building badass features. That's going to help them, right? It's not about personal wealth. I don't think. I don't think it's about that in the end. It does turn into this. It becomes like a drug, in a way,
Right.
And so you really got to do what you love. You've got to be that kind of type of persona, I think. And I don't know how you define that persona. Well, I've probably got some ideas, but for me, actually, it surpassed being about money. Money then became a way to, like I say, to innovate, to look after the people I make promises to in my companies. And it was all about such moving goalposts, but it was all just about, okay, what are we going to do now? Okay, we've released it. Great. All right, that's been done. So what's the next phase? It's just like hamster wheel. It's a continual hamster wheel. This is going to sound crazy. I don't even have any exit strategies for any of my companies. I don't. I have no intention of exiting anytime soon. I've never taken investment from anyone either. Everything's always been bootstrapped. There's another topic here, I suppose, because I believe that your company should be revenue generating as soon as possible. So you have a little bit of a runway and you get revenue generating instantly, and you build your product to be revenue generating as quickly as possible.
I think there is this also another fallacy in the startup world, as in, oh, you just got to get the VC money. I'm like, yeah, but usually what happens is you just get very careless because it's not your money and you're like, let's go crazy with it. 90% of people that I've spoken with, from founders to startup operators, they're like, yeah, we just got some new investment. So what should I do? I'm like, you should calm down first.
Talk to some fishermen. Yeah, I mean, you really, I mean, if you have $1 million, in seed money or Series A money, or you have 75,000 of your own money, the fact that that's your own money, you will make decisions 5 times, 10 times better than if it was
Yes.
somebody else's.
Awesome.
And if you take this, you'll obsess. I don't want to know. I don't think we'll spend it there. I think we'll spend it here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if a VC or some angel investors have given you that money and they're encouraging you to spend that money, because of course that's what it's there for, you may not make the same decisions, and then you'll start to get burnt. So I think actually by using your own money and not being reliant on other people, trying to make it work with those funds, I think you make better decisions.
Absolutely. I think there is no arguing with that. I want to switch gears a little bit. Basically, I like what you said about that you're driven by serving other people. So being of service. And I get like how many people you are serving on a daily basis in your professional environment. But I know you've got a couple of tiny humans that you got to serve at home. How do you balance it all? Because you've got a lot of different hats.
What's the podcast called? Savage, I think it's called. Yeah, okay. This is probably not going to come across the way it should be. So I love, adore, in fact, my purpose is my children. And there's a really good statement, actually. There's somebody said, your kids, we work for our children, or my purpose is my children. And your children won't remember, when you're gone, how big the bank account is. They'll only remember the moments. And if they were to ask, they would prefer to, have you here than have any money or, extra clothes or whatever it is. So I'm really aware of that, cognitively aware of that. But as an entrepreneur, building other people's startups and my own, I spend 18 hours a day working, and the sacrifice is I don't see them as much as I should, basically, and that is, so I have breakfast in the morning. I take my daughter to school every day. That's one non-negotiable. So I drive from Monaco to Mougins each morning. It's a 45-minute drive from Monaco to Mougins. We sang Frozen in the car this morning for the 45 minutes, which is true. We listened to some techno, I think, prior to that.
That's the balance, right? Frozen and techno.
Yeah, they go together really well as a mashup. And then I come to work in Mougins, or I've got some like an office here, and then I'll pick her up again and I'll take her back. So about an hour and a half. I've got a son who's 2, who I hug to death each morning, but and he sleeps between us at night. He's so annoying. I taught him to high five, and now he just high fives my face in the middle of the night. So he'll wake up and go high five, and it's quite jarring, especially if you've had a late one. But I think my wife understands commitment and what it takes to make things happen. And I'm not suggesting it's a very it sounds very toxic. I do things that I love. I have a really great routine. I've got a bike there, so I'll go for a ride down some trails, I think, just to get some downtime before I pick my daughter up. But yeah, I mean, it's very, very, very difficult, there is no balance. It is weighted towards the other baby, which, I've just got to be very conscious that although I haven't got an exit strategy, I need to finish what I started. That's one of the personality traits that I've got. I've got to finish what I've started. I mean, you should ask me if I've got a target. I haven't got a target. But so where does it finish? But I've got to finish what I've started. I've got to get to a place where I feel that's enough now. I know there's a time limit to it. At the weekends, I do shut off. But the problem is, you work so hard like that Monday to Friday, and that on Saturdays there is a come down. And this is apparently a therapist that I was talking to, and she said, Charles, on Saturdays, what's happening is you've got this work come down where you sort of come down slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perhaps why Saturday mornings you're still in work mode. You're still.
Right.
I mean, I talk to my wife, who is. I mean, we've grown up together since we were kids. Married for almost 20 years, and I talk to her like she's one of my employees on Saturday because I'm just in that mode. I don't mean to. It's just like it just comes out. She soon corrects me quite quickly, and then Sundays are beautiful. I mean, Sundays then become everything. And then, but about 4 p.m., starting to think about how we can improve other people's companies, because you're building other people's companies usually. How can we, help them this week or whatever it is, or what's the strategy? So you get this really small window of beautifulness on Sundays. There's my balance.
Do you have any practical strategies for shutting it off? Because what happens to me very often, and well, but listeners probably don't, I've got 2 kids as well, is that I can shut it off for a period of time, either in the evening or on the weekend, but inevitably it crawls back in.
Yes, I do. And there's almost like a reset button. So there's a song actually, it's by, I don't even know who it's by now, but it's called I'm Moving to New York Because I've Got Problems With My Sleep. And I can't remember who it's by now, but we did it. We went to New York for 2 months, and you don't have to go to New York. You could go to York, instead, as an example. It could be anywhere, but you'd be very surprised if you just stop, and you have to really stop, and you have to change your routine, because I'm quite routined, in what I do. You have to break it, because the second you put me in a different time zone, which is not that different, to be honest, in an environment that is not a desk or what I'm used to, you're kind of breaking that routine a little bit. So, for me, it had to be drastic. And then all of a sudden, you're sort of, my wife's like, okay, we'll go to this museum, or we'll go to Central Park. Then the week passes by and you go, oh, right, all those things that I was really worried about, and was so, oh, he's not ringing me about that, or no, actually everyone's fine. And so it's really, for me, is that kind of eject or reset button. And since I've known about it, I try and do it every 8 weeks or so. So you kind of ramp it up. And then whenever the fizzy moment, you could call it, happens, because you're not great at making those decisions when you're at that point anyway, when you're starting to be fizzy. Go to New York, go to York, go somewhere that breaks the routine.
Right. There is a phrase I've heard from someone very, very long time ago. It was also about you just got to change your geo coordinates. Sometimes it changes everything for you. It doesn't have to be, like I said, drastic. You can just go to I don't know, a nearby town or something like that. But just by ejecting yourself out of what you said, the routine and all of that, sometimes things can just simply fall into place, just because you've basically taking yourself out of this continuous vicious circle of doing the same thing again and again. There is another question that I usually ask people in my confession booth. Is there one thing that you thoroughly regret that has happened in your entrepreneurial journey?
Is there something that I regret? Yeah, probably, yes. I've got, I think to be a good entrepreneur, you have to forget about the horrible parts. They don't exist anymore. We just continue onwards.
Right.
There are some regrets. Yeah, I regretted I didn't do it sooner.
I very much share that one, for sure.
I regret trying to do it by myself and thinking that I know what I'm doing. And I could have fast-tracked by, they say, if you want to get faster at running, you need to go hang around with the faster runners and you'll become faster.
Right.
definitely wasn't hanging around with faster runners, So I
Mm-hmm.
think I regret not doing that. And yeah, so I've lost time. That's the regret. I lost time by not listening, just trying to, I'm quite, some people call me tenacious, but like, headstrong, I'm going to do this, and just like the founders that we were talking about, I got burnt and then had to come back. And yeah, I lost a lot of time. And, I've been doing this for 20 years now. So I've been in this industry for 20 years. 20 years ago, I was going around telling people that apps and, e-commerce was going to be the future, and not everyone bought into it. So the regretful thing is, it's not as if I wasn't in the right place at the right time. I very much was. Now, that's made me a very experienced UX professional, product director, product manager, user researcher, innovator, now from that, having that experience. But I do believe I could have built some great apps, had I taken a faster route. There was no universities back then, so that, there was no university courses for design back then, or
Right.
product management.
Right.
Everything I learned was through YouTube. So, which is funny in a way, and being curious. But yeah, I suppose I didn't know what I didn't know.
And we're making full circle here with that phrase. You don't know what you don't know. What I usually do at the end of each episode is giving some type of a homework to the listeners. Why? Because this is something that I also preach at the Roar, is basically like, you got to practice what you learn, because otherwise it's never going to happen, because you'll probably forget about it like 5 minutes after, finishing up this podcast. So I think, since we've talked so much about talking to the fishes and talking to the fishermen, I think the first homework can be, make sure you know who your fishes are, talk to them, but also talk to the other fishermen. Do you think that would be like a good piece of homework for the listeners?
Absolutely. And read about it. There's lots of material on there. It will tell you what to do. It's very, very straightforward. But definitely listen to other fishermen and listen to the fish. I think it's fantastic. Fantastic way to go about it. The actual way to do it is to speak to 100 user interviews. And if you go to any accelerator, they'll make you do 100 user interviews. User interviews are different from user research, or like moderated user testing, or unmoderated. User interviews kind of talk about the proposition, perhaps, and we can ask them, really wonderful qualitative questions. So, when you're talking to the fish, there is a set way, which is speak to 100 people about your idea, and you will come out either with a different idea at the end of it, or an absolute understanding of the direction to go in.
Okay. And I think the second one could be what you mentioned about shutting down, basically like, make sure you, from time to time, remove yourself from the routine, so you can just basically reset.
Love that.
Okay. I think we've discussed a lot of very interesting things. I have like a million other questions, so we have to absolutely do like part 2 of this at some point.
I would be delighted to do that.
Do you have any like last words of wisdom, which is what I always ask at the end of each episode?
Do what you love. Because the money will not be important when you get there for yourself. We talked about it being good for the business. Don't do it for money. Do it because you're curious. Do it because it interests you. But do it and fail fast and fail cheap.
Oh, that's a really good one too. Yeah, I forgot we talked about that. All right. Thank you so much, Charlie. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Oh, wait. If people want to find you, how do they find you?
just type in Charles Engelen on LinkedIn, and
So LinkedIn
I'll
is the
be
best
there.
way. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, we're dropping the links in description all the time, but LinkedIn would be the best.
No,
The best way.
LinkedIn. Yeah, and honestly, to anyone listening to this, if we go back to the Oprah analogy, anyone that reaches out to me and just wants some advice, I'll give you as much time as I possibly can and try and stop you from getting burnt.
I love that. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Ollie.